History 1. About 10 years ago, I worked for a short time at a small gas station close to my house. Both of my kids had started school, and we always needed extra money. I was around 26 or 27 and hadn't ever really worked anywhere before. It was fun, though, as we stayed a little busy throughout the day. There were 3 factories nearby, so we got a lot of traffic from the employees, especially during shift changes. One weekday morning, I was working by myself, which was unusual since my manager, who usually worked days with me, was out sick. No big deal, as it was nothing I couldn't handle. People were in and out all morning, and nothing out of the ordinary happened until a transfer truck pulled in and parked to the side of the building. We didn't carry diesel fuel, but it wasn't unusual to have big trucks pull in for drinks or bathroom breaks. The driver, a tall guy who was not unattractive but a bit creepy looking, walked in with a huge refillable coffee mug and asked if there was fresh coffee and if he could refill his mug. I told him no problem, and he filled his mug and came up to pay, starting to chit-chat. He told me he had a delivery for one of the factories up the street and asked for directions. I told him no problem, it happens all the time. He then mentioned he was from Arkansas and that after he dropped his load, he was headed back home for a few days. I was just politely nodding my head. Then he asked if there was a restroom. I pointed to where it was but did not come out from behind the counter. He started trying to chat with me again without going to the restroom and asked if I was working alone. That's when all kinds of alarms went off in my head. I told him my coworker had to run an errand and would be right back. He ended up staying there for about 20 minutes, trying to small talk and asking at least 6 or 7 times where the restroom was. During this time, customers were coming in and out, and when someone came in, he would walk around the store, kind of hiding behind the shelves. At this point, I was trying to stay calm and figure out how to get him out of there. I looked out at the gas pumps and saw a man from one of the factories up the street on a forklift, filling it with gas. When he came in, I tried to start a conversation and asked him silly questions to get him to look at my face, so I could gesture to where the creepy guy was standing behind the potato chips. He didn't catch the hint until he walked out the door, turned back to look at me, and I mouthed, "Help me." He turned around and came back in. By this time, the creepy guy had come out from behind the potato chips. The forklift guy asked if I was okay, and I told him no. He asked if I needed help, and I said yes, all very low so the creepy guy couldn't hear. Suddenly, the forklift guy ran around the chips and slammed the creepy guy into the Coke cooler, telling him that the lady wanted him to leave. The creepy guy ran out, jumped into his truck, and hightailed it out of there. The forklift guy stayed with me while I called the police. I made a report, gave the best description I could, called a coworker to come and stay with me, and the police and forklift guy left. About an hour later, one of the cops came back to tell me they had caught the guy speeding on the highway leading out of town. Not only did he have an empty trailer on his truck, but he hadn't been to drop his load. He didn't leave in that direction, and there was no way he had time to get to the factory, unload, and get back to where he was pulled over in that amount of time. He also had a pistol that had been reported stolen in Alabama and had just been released from prison, where he served 2 years for rape. He was wanted in Missouri for not reporting to his probation officer after being released. I have no clue why he was in a transfer truck or what he was doing in small-town Georgia, but he was clearly making his rounds through the Southeast. I quit that job within a week and never worked in a gas station again. History 2. It was a summer night. Very late, around 2 a.m. My friend Mike and I were driving home from another friend's house. I pulled into a gas station on Route 17 in New Jersey, right near the New York border, to fill up. My gas cap is on the driver's side, so when I pulled in, the pump was on my left. There was a car in front of me that was just about finished, but I decided to stay at the middle pump anyway. On the other side of the pump, there was an SUV already at the first pump, parallel with the car in front of me. The SUV had its window rolled down, and so did we. After about a minute, the car in front of us pulled away, leaving just my car and the SUV at the station. The attendant went inside the little store adjacent to the gas station parking lot. During this time, as we were both filling up, Mike and I were just talking about the night and laughing. Suddenly we stopped because we could hear 2 adults arguing in the SUV, and they were getting louder and louder. We also heard a child sobbing. After a little while, the sobbing turned into crying, and the child kept getting louder and louder. At this point, the attendant came out of the store, but the people inside the SUV didn't notice him because they kept yelling and swearing. What I didn't realize was that they didn't even notice there was another car getting gas too. It was at this moment when the lady in the SUV turned toward the kid in the back and, in the angriest, sternest, most evil voice, bellowed, "VDJNJ, you're never going to see your parents again, so you might as well stop crying." DJKJ Mike and I looked at each other with eyes popping out of our heads. A million thoughts rushed through our minds. We wondered if the kid's parents had passed away, if the kid was being adopted, or if the woman in the SUV was just being cruel. But the thought that kept repeating was maybe this was a kidnapping or an abduction. Mind you, all of this happened within seconds. At this point, they must have heard the click and snap of the trigger on the gas pump because the man and woman in the SUV suddenly got quiet, and all you could hear was the kid crying and sobbing. It was also at that moment when they realized they weren't alone. I saw the lady trying to peek out of her car from behind the door pillar to see if we were watching. I paid the gas attendant and started to pull out of the gas station. I looked into the rear window and saw just the top of a small head and small hands on the face. Then I looked into the front seat, and the lady in the passenger side shot me the most demonic look ever. I felt like she was going to suck my soul out through my eyes. I tried to look at the male driver, but he was just staring straight ahead, and I couldn't see him much. We pulled out onto Route 17, all the while looking in my mirror, watching them, trying to see if she was tracking us with her eyes. But it was hard to see with the glare of the station lights on 17. I drove slow, way under the speed limit. Mike and I were debating what to do. Do we call the cops? Do we confront them ourselves? I said I'd drive slow and see if they passed us. If they did, we'd trail them and call the cops. We did pass an exit after the gas station, so there would have been an opportunity for the SUV to turn off and not catch up to us. Luckily, that didn't happen. After a few minutes, the SUV sped past us, going at least 80 miles per hour. I had no idea if they knew it was us they just passed, or if they didn't care. Immediately, we gave chase but made sure to keep our distance so that we weren't spotted. By this time, we were on the thruway. It was empty, and we were about 10 bus lengths behind them, doing about 80 miles per hour. There are no exits for miles on this stretch of the road. Mike and I made up our minds to call 911. He called while I drove and explained everything to the dispatcher. She asked for the mile marker we were passing and instructed us not to approach. She said that there would be a police cruiser waiting at the next on-ramp onto the thruway. So we didn't approach, but we kept following and kept pace just to make sure. As we passed the first exit, which if I remember correctly is for Woodbury Commons, there was no police car anywhere, and there were still no cars anywhere on the northbound side. At this point I realized I had closed to about 10 car lengths of the SUV and started to back off a little. About a minute later, I saw headlights appear in my rearview mirror, very far behind. However, the headlights were getting closer very fast. Within a matter of moments, the headlights were next to us, and we saw that it was a state police car. He just zipped by us and kept gunning it until he was right on the SUV's tail. He trailed them for a few seconds, and suddenly we saw the light bar on top turn on. Mike and I instantly breathed a sigh of relief. The cop was pulling them over. As we approached and passed them, another cop car, already with its lights on, was pulling up quickly behind them as well. The next few days we tried to research the papers and the internet to see if there were any reports of abductions or kidnappings or police thwarting an abduction, but we found nothing. We never really found out what happened, but the look the lady shot me told me all I needed to know that night. I hope it was nothing more than a cruel joke, but from her eyes and her tone, we just knew that kid's future might be questionable. I'd like to think we were able to help the kid, but I suppose I'll never find out. History 3. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and back then, I was working the night shift alone at a gas station in Northern California. I'd been with this company for several years and never had any major issues. The corporation that owned the chain was diligent about maintaining safety measures. However, A few months before the incident, a new company acquired the chain, and all the safety protocols were dismantled to cut costs. It was just another typical night as I arrived at work for my shift around 10 p.m. during the night shift. I was responsible for cleaning and stocking while assisting customers. Alcohol sales stopped between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., so every night at 2 a.m., I would engage the magnetic locks and not let anyone in for about an hour. This allowed me to sweep the floor, mop, and stock the coolers. Technically, I wasn't supposed to lock the doors, but it was necessary for my safety. Around 2:30 a.m., I was busy moving cases of soda back to the coolers. The main cooler was a large walk-in, so I couldn't see the front doors while I was inside, which is why I always locked them. Suddenly, as I was walking out of the back room with a case of soda, I heard someone banging on the doors. Despite the sign on the doors stating I would reopen soon, some people just didn't get it. I walked out and saw a large man, clearly homeless and agitated, screaming at me through the doors. I told him to come back at 3:30 a.m. and went back to work. An hour later, I finished stocking and began making coffee for the morning rush. I collected the trash, unlocked the doors, and headed to the dumpster across the lot. The surrounding businesses closed at 9 p.m. and didn't open until after my shift ended, so there was no one around. As I walked out with the trash, I saw the same man from earlier. He appeared from around the corner of the building next door and was walking straight toward me, dragging a wooden baseball bat. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't make it back to the doors in time. Just as he got halfway across the lot, Ricky, a guy who worked the night shift at a nearby grocery store, pulled into the lot. The man looked at Ricky, then turned towards the doors instead of me. He leaned his bat against the wall outside the doors and went inside. Ricky parked in front of the doors and saw the bat. We made eye contact, and he knew something was wrong. He came into the store, got a soda refill, and stood at the counter with me while we waited for the man to leave. The man tried to buy a large slushie with food stamps, but I told him he couldn't use EBT for fountain drinks. He grabbed the slushie off the counter and dumped it on the floor. Furious, I told him to leave and threatened to call the police. Ricky stepped in, saying, "Hey buddy, you don't talk to a lady like that." The man, much larger than Ricky, got in his face. I engaged the mag locks and kept telling the man to leave. The doors could be opened from the inside but not the outside. He backed up to the door, keeping his foot in it, trying to reach his bat. When he slipped his foot out for a moment, the mag locks engaged, locking him out. He screamed and banged on the doors, threatening me with all sorts of horrors. The police arrived after a few minutes. They knew exactly who he was, a local transient with a history of violence and psychological issues. He had been in and out of prison for assault and other serious crimes. Ricky was my guardian angel that night. If he hadn't shown up when he did, I don't know what would have happened. Thank you, Ricky. You saved me, and you didn't know it at the time, but you also saved my unborn child's life. I was 2 months pregnant. I quit my job that same day. The company has still not improved safety measures, and the man continues to frequent the store.